Greetings all, and welcome to the second segment of A Traveler's Guide 2 for Talon 4. And today, we'll be continuing with a look at the planet in the next segment, A Traveler's Guide to the Talon 4 Chozo Ruins. The Chozo ruins are the structures that were left behind by the Chozo after sealing off the Leviathan and serve as a testament to their will to live in harmony with nature. Once filled with the meditative and spirited speaking of the Chozo, the ruins have been similarly occupied by various monsters over the years, and it has been reduced to a crumbling visage of its former self since their departure. In place of the Chozo themselves, though, their writings adorn the walls and buildings they once called their own, speaking of the destruction that had befallen the planet and the visions of the future, pertaining to one that would come and cleanse the world of the great evil, that duty falling to none other than the Hunter. This place thankfully did not see much in the way of space pirate corruption, as they were unable to properly handle the many Chozo ghosts that haunt the most sacred rooms of this complex and guard them from all that dare to stride within them, including the Hunter herself. Something science team has repeatedly noted to be was not an issue of fear, but an issue of being unable to do much to prevent them from interfering with work. Sure. Regardless, the land as a whole is fairly arid in some parts, while others show flourishing plant life of all sorts that have either adapted to the arid climate on their own, or, in most cases, are only able to survive because of the various irrigation systems the Chozo installed in the area that helps to feed water to any plant life attempting to survive in the area. It is a shame to see these ruins in such deplorable conditions, but from the perspective of the Chozo, it seems to have been better left uninhabited than risk the lives of the people anymore against the ravages of the monsters and explorers around the complex. And thankfully for those that are looking to take a trip there, the intact ruins can provide a spectacular view, so long as you keep away from any parts that look structurally deficient. Before we take a look at the more active life forms on this planet, it's important to note the native flora and minor fauna that help to form the backbone of the diet and food web that exists in the Chozo ruins, as well as entities that have already been covered in the previous video report. As far as can be spoken on previously covered organisms, the Chozo ruins are home to birds, butterflies, fish, beetles, both tangleweed and venomweed, and blast caps, as well as the post-balmu, but the lattermost occurrence is so rare that will be covered later when we examine Phendrana drifts. Now, on to a new entry for minor creatures in the area. Shirlic trees found in these ruins are the result of bioengineering on the part of the Chozo, and are often used not only as decorative plants, as they possess beautiful striped red leaves and produce tiny yellow fruits, but also for construction, as the thick bark and sturdy physical structure makes them ideal for creating natural bridges. They can survive both indoors and outdoors and require little in the way of water to survive. In fact, these plants have been bioengineered to be able to utilize chemosynthesis to convert the chemical vapors in the atmosphere into a form of biologically usable energy, introducing some minor differences between the variants found in Talon 4 and those found inside Skytown of Elysia. It is likely that the Chozo may have planted these same trees in the depths of places like Brinstar of Zebus and even SR-388, as it is said that they are planted at every colony the Chozo create. But a lack of a careful study of the plant life of those planets has resulted in lost information since both plants are no longer in existence. Sadly, unlike the great trees of Talon 4, these plants are not as resistant to the effects of toxins as the Chozo might have liked, as many of these plants were withering from exposure to the polluted waters and undergoing cellular decomposition before the source of said toxins was cleared out by the Hunter. Now, the trees seem to be recovering quite nicely and are more than safe to interact with even if you lack substantial protective gear. Alright then, with those minor details out of the way, now let's take a look at some of the more prominent life forms that can be found within the natural parts of the Chozo ruins. Scarabs are simple insectoids that usually go unnoticed by most other creatures until they decide to make their presence known, and the method of doing so is usually quite explosive. Scarabs tend to feed on detritus and fungi on the walls of artificial ruins and structures like transport tubes, and possess a fairly sturdy exoskeleton made from a special chitin mixture that contains minor amounts of iron to help reinforce their shell and make it so sturdy that they can actually pierce solid rock. In addition, they possess only a single eye, which is oddly kept in the middle of their exoskeleton, giving them a central field of vision that allows them to completely see all around them, but otherwise prevents them from actually looking forwards. Scarabs tend to move in large swarms in order to ensure that as many individual members as possible get the chance to reproduce, and if needed, these little creatures are not afraid to go the distance to ensure that survival. Scarabs are normally quite complacent and do not bother other creatures intentionally, but when a swarm comes into the pathway of a much larger creature, they instinctively interpret that creature as a threat and will begin to embed their bodies into the walls and floor of the passageway they are traveling through. Once they have embedded themselves, they cannot remove their bodies from the chosen substrate. The moment that a potential predator makes contact with them, the scarab releases a volatile mixture of chemicals in its body that creates a gaseous product at an incredibly fast rate, effectively causing its hard body to explode violently. This ensures that at least part of the swarm gets away, or, in the case of a full swarm attack, that they are doing other populations of the species a favor by eliminating a large and deadly enemy. Despite this, however, scarabs are still weak creatures and be killed with a single shot from any standard weapon, oftentimes causing nearby scarabs to self-destruct at the same time. A few careful shots is all that is needed to take down an entire swarm, but careful aim is still recommended to make sure that one doesn't miss any, only to have them violently explode nearby when one's guard is down. Since these creatures tend to act more in self-defense than anything else in the wild, and merely wish to go about their normal lives unimpeded, they're relatively harmless and really only deserving of an assignment to threat level alpha, even if they can prove to be an explosive nuisance around campsites and confined spaces. The war wasp is a versatile insect that comes in many forms across many different planetary systems, but otherwise have a similar behavior and life cycle regardless of the planet that it is found upon. As with the earth wasps that they are named after, war wasps are highly territorial creatures that feed not on honey, but on the flesh of other creatures in order to survive. They are able to incapacitate small to medium-sized prey using their stingers, which are filled with a powerful paralytic toxin that can render their target unable to move their muscles at all, allowing the war wasp to then feast on them while they are still alive. These creatures do not take trespassers on the territory very kindly, and will viciously dive bomb just about anything that gets near them, regardless of their personal danger in the matter. Thankfully, these creatures rarely ever travel far from their nest, only attacking those that are at a distance if they are pursuing their target as a prey item. Despite the small form and frail bodies, these creatures can pierce metal with their sharp stingers, and are thus a threat to even armored bounty hunters. Some varieties can even use projectile attacks to strike from afar, but these shots are usually not that powerful, and are rarely ever capable of taking out a target on their own. Sadly, at least from the viewpoint of Science Team, these creatures have started down the road of extinction in some of the native lands, especially in places like Talon 4, as the royal jelly used to create and feed the queens of the hives is so tasty and nutritious that they are being hunted to the point of total eradication, though some efforts are being made to curb this activity to preserve what is left of the planet's natural biota. Alongside the behavior, another important aspect of the war wasp worth discussing is their hives. War wasp hives are generally built over crevices and rocky structures with whatever materials are at hand. As such, it is not uncommon for war wasp hives to contain a mixture of both organic and inorganic objects in the structure, oftentimes giving them a composite appearance that serves to make them more resilient against direct attack. These materials are carried back to the nesting site by war wasps with their forelimbs before being glued together using adhesives that are secreted from the abdomen, and they are so well structured that they are effectively immune to the effects of beam weapons, though a single well-placed missile is enough to shatter the structure entirely. War wasps use up a lot of energy in the daily hunting routine, so they need their hive not only for the sake of giving the queen war wasp somewhere to stay, but to use as a resting ground. Even if a hive is destroyed though, it should not be assumed that it will be the end of the war wasps that made it. In fact, it is not uncommon to see the insects start construction of a new nest almost immediately upon the destruction of their previous abode, and they will fiercely target anything that dares to go near their new nest before the construction is completed. This, alongside the wasps that occupy and live within, makes the combination of the two a serious irritation to others, but their frames are weak enough that they can be destroyed fairly easily, and really only a major threat in large numbers, so an assignment to threat level alpha is more than sufficient for them in this context. Ram war wasps on Talon 4 are significantly different from their normal relatives in that they have a bright red abdomen and are the only type of war wasp that have achieved a true hive mind. This is a direct result of the Chozo integrating these creatures with a mechanical nest known as the hive mecha in their ruins. These creatures have been taught how to live and interact with the hive mecha in a symbiotic relationship. While the hive mecha gives them a damp, dark place to rest and reproduce, the ram war wasps help to defend the hive mecha as it has no other form of offense or defense aside from them. Smarter than the average war wasp, these insects will fly around larger targets in circles in large numbers, waiting for the moment to strike. Once they feel that they can catch a target off guard, they will fly in and strike the target at the same time, overwhelming it with multiple blows and either killing it, regardless of how much larger the target may be compared to them, or at least hurting it to the point of retreating. While they might only be a bit more durable than the average war wasp, ram war wasps are certainly more dangerous and should be approached with caution and patience, as the only way to really get them to stop attacking without retreating is to destroy the hive mecha that protects their nest. As such, they definitely get a bump up to threat level beta, if only because of the extreme aggression they show in large numbers. Barbed war wasps are easily distinguished from other types by their green body coloration and their ability to actually use the stingers as a projectile weapon, though it is known that normal war wasps on Aether seem to have developed this ability to a minor degree as well. These creatures will rarely ever choose to get in the face of their targets, instead firing the stingers at a distance of up to 20 meters at a target in order to inflict damage. The stingers are filled with an acidic compound designed to soften and pre-digest prey, and these insects are capable of regenerating their lost stingers within a matter of seconds, ensuring they can easily overwhelm anything that cannot destroy them or the hive in time to save their life. Much like Grand War Wasp, this places barbed war wasps as a bigger issue to deal with, even in an enclosed space, and thus also bumps them up to threat level beta, even though they might be exceedingly rare to see on Talon 4 these days. The Ion is a bizarre organism comprised almost entirely of ocular tissue that is incapable of doing much else other than annoying those that are forced to get past them. The Ion does not appear to have an anatomical plan that would suggest it to be natural origin of any sort. It is thus hypothesized that these creatures were actually bioengineered by the Chozo that once lived on Talon 4 as an organic security system. The Ion reproduces with spore-like cells that it releases into the air on hot days. Once the spores find a crack or crevice in a wall to sprout from, they will quickly grow into their normal adult size by absorbing immense amounts of solar energy. The Ion does not need to feed on anything as it is able to sustain its life functions on solar energy alone, which is an advantage for them as the root-like lower bodies are effectively impossible to separate from the area growth initiated from once they get a good grip on it. These creatures have been implanted with a sense of protection within their limited intelligence that causes them to only open their eyes when they feel vibrations in the air from approaching creatures, and once they do open, they are able to fire concentrated beams of absorbed solar energy from the eyes back and forth along a set path, looking much like an organic laser field when present in groups. Ions are usually not that much of a problem as they are not aggressive in their duties, but they can nonetheless make it very difficult to get past without taking some damage in the process. Thankfully, these creatures cannot adjust too well to sudden changes in brightness, so if they are hit with a beam weapon of some sort, the intense light will scare the Ion into closing its eye for a few seconds. If worst comes to worst and they need to be destroyed, their soft bodies are only able to withstand normal shots from a beam weapon, and will explode violently if they are struck with a charged shot. Since they tend to act only as security systems for the most part, and otherwise are non-aggressive, merely committing to the job they were designed for, they deserve an assignment to threat level alpha, and are rather easy to avoid, otherwise get past, if you can just overwhelm them with bright light. The plasmite is a fairly harmless insectoid found on Talon 4 that can oftentimes be of great use in illuminating otherwise dark and destitute environments. The plasmite is a small flea-like insect that spends most of its time flapping its very small wings rapidly in order to search for small insects and watery plants to feed on. The plasmite is uniquely able to absorb and radiate thermal energy in the form of light, and does so when it is hunting, using the light to scare off predators that may be hiding in the dark while they fly around. However, this light does not tend to work so well in outdoor environments, so the plasmite is usually found exclusively indoors, where there are very few creatures able to actually eat them. This same light can be of great benefit to the plasmite itself, as it equally illuminates the surrounding area in the dark rooms they occupy out of safety. Plasmites can be easily hurt and killed with basic weaponry, and cannot take much in the way of damage before dying, but killing them should be avoided for two main reasons. For one thing, the light that they do provide can help explorers trying to get through darker areas without stepping into a hole or environmental hazard. If a plasmite is not moving in a direction that is helpful, a single shot to a wall or structure nearby is usually enough to frighten it and cause it to quickly buzz off to a different part of the room. Moreover, if they feel that they are in severe danger, these creatures can emit a powerful burst of thermal energy from the glowing sac on their undersides that can deal a small amount of damage while the plasmite makes their escape. As such, these creatures are best left alone and only killed if they become an obstacle, garnering a position within threat level alpha, and even if killing them isn't necessary, one should first consider how hard it's going to be to get through a room without their light to guide the way. Looking back now to the past to when it was still active, the Hive Mecha was a second-generation combat drone designed specifically by the Chozo to interact with living creatures and form a close relationship with them. While the Chozo of Talon 4 had given up most of the technology in the creation of the structures now recognized as the Chozo ruins, there is clear evidence they also wished to experiment with the native life of the planet to see if they could perhaps find a true meld between life and non-life, and with the Hive Mecha it stood as one of their proudest achievements. The Hive Mecha itself has no way to fight back against attackers. Instead, it relied on ram war wasps that had formed a symbiotic relationship with. The Hive Mecha acted as the sheltered home of these rare creatures and helped to train and work with them to learn basic attack patterns and how to gather large amounts of food with these advanced tactics, all in the hopes they would follow its commands and defend it in times of need, which did prove to be a rousing success. This relationship was so strong between the two units that ram war wasps are not found in any other place on the planet, exclusively using the Hive Mecha as their nesting site. While the Hive Mecha did have the ability to summon its brood if it detected an unknown stranger in its near vicinity, a guard protocol used to ensure that powerful weaponry like the missile launcher was protecting did not fall into the wrong hands, A fatal flaw in its design had left the beak-shaped ports where left its protective brood out unarmored and easily susceptible to damage from even weak weapons like the power beam. As such, damaging and closing off these ports was the only way to actually deactivate the Hive mecha, though it had to be done quickly as the machine would continue to release Red War Wasp out of its inner chamber until it was fully disabled, and the small critters could easily prove to be overwhelming to large numbers, as mentioned previously. This ancient piece of tech is a wonderful sight to see even today, despite it no longer really being active. And while it might not pose a threat today, alongside its companions, it easily has a place as part of threat level beta while operational, and has gone on to inspire artisans and combat experts of all sorts with its design and unique synergy with living life forms. Compared to standard Talon 4 beetles, plated beetles are far more vicious variety that can prove to be a slight problem without serious firepower at one's disposal. These creatures are really distinguished from other beetle types by their massive size and the massive cranial plate that adorns their head. This dome structure is built out of the hardened exoskeleton material and is so thick and sturdy that it is equivalent to them growing a titanium plate on their heads. As with the lesser brethren, plated beetles attack primarily by charging an opponent with their massive cranial plate, and while they also telegraph their attacks enough to make it possible to quickly dodge out of the way when targeting them, the larger frame means they still have a greater chance of hitting their target. While the front of their body is completely immune to damage from all forms of portable conventional weaponry, their bright red and large lower abdomen is highly vulnerable to damage. As such, it is possible to easily kill these creatures with a couple of missiles to the back end, but these insects are more than aware of this weakness and usually make sure to keep their faces in front of the target at all times to protect their body, leaving them only vulnerable to damage after they miss with a charging attack. This can require explorers to have fast footwork accessible to them if they really want a chance to get around these beasts and destroy them, or just avoid them altogether, make it easy to grant them a place in threat level beta for their armored forms and aggressive tendencies. The Oculus is a bizarre mollusk that spends most of its time showing off its strange appearance without interacting much with other life forms, though in this case, appearances can be deceiving. These strange creatures seem to be the result of bioengineering, but they are virtually harmless and don't add much to their environment, thus seeming to lack much of a purpose. They utilize their razor-sharp spines and their tiny limbs to stick themselves onto rocky surfaces and cling there, moving around slowly in their attempt to find some sort of tiny organism to feed on, as the mouths directly attached to their underside. The most distinguishing part of these creatures is the enormous eye that adorns the top of their shell, and while it may look fake, it is in fact a fully functioning eye. The shell that the eye is mounted on is extremely durable and completely indestructible against conventional weaponry, and if the Oculus even feels that it is being threatened, it will retract its eye back into its shell and become stiff as a rock until it feels that the coast is clear. Even outside of this though, the Oculus does not have many natural predators, as its body is constantly generating a powerful electrical shield that can stun and inflict decent contact damage to anything that dares to get close to them. It is this feature in particular that leads many to suggest the Oculus, like the Ion, was artificially created by the Chozo, though the reason why has yet to be determined. Regardless, the Oculus is a benign creature that should not be worried about too much and best left ignored, especially since its shell will effectively repel all forms of beam and concussive weaponry anyways, and deserves a simple assignment to threat level alpha. So long as you don't try and touch them, as a viscous shock will be your only reward for doing so. Plated parasites are closer to the extreme end of the parasite family scale, and really identified by their grey armored hides. These creatures are simple scavengers like all the basic parasite types, but possess armor forged from metals native to Talon 4 that is perfectly adept at allowing them to survive in extremely hot environments. Moreover, it also protects them completely from any types of beam weapon, though its stiff nature makes it highly vulnerable to cataclysmic damage and shattering under the concussive force of something like a morph ball bomb. Since they only feed on inorganic matter, as long as they aren't in one's way, these beasts are easy to deal with and avoid, giving them a place within threat level alpha. Shriek bats are an extremely common type of life form found on many different planets and all have the same basic anatomy and powers. These mammals, often appearing more insect-like in many cases, are very similar in behavior to earth bats and generally spend most of their lives roosting in caverns where they feed on insects, reptiles, and even small mammals for sustenance. Their vicious little teeth are sharp enough to pierce soft hides and can easily wound even creatures as large as humans, though this is usually not the attack pattern of the larger creatures who have to worry about facing. While they come in many varieties, these creatures are all alike in they possess extremely high body temperatures peaking at around 121 degrees Celsius. The exact reason for possessing such high body temperatures is still uncertain, but because of this, these creatures need to rest and hang from cool cavern ceilings in order to keep their bodies as cool as possible. While they may behave very similarly to screes in that they are very aggressive and territorial and will swoop down anything that dares to get near them, the results are dramatically different. When shriek bats feel that they are in danger, they will drop down from their roosting spot and quickly rush towards the victim at full force. Upon hitting them, the hypothalamus goes out of control and instantly elevates their body temperature so fiercely that it tips them over the edge and causes them to explode in a massive thermal discharge. The explosion is usually enough to damage most creatures and even kill smaller ones, but the shriek bats pay the ultimate price in dying for the cause. Even so, this defensive behavior has helped these creatures to become some of the most common beasts on the planets they occupy, and are in turn something to look out for, though they're usually easy to eliminate as a single shot is usually enough to trigger the ignition automatically and cause them to self-destruct. Some have called for their extermination in places like Talon 4, as a result of the damage their exploding bodies tend to inflict on the infrastructure of buildings, but at this point it seems to be the least of everyone's problems on that particular planet, especially since the Chozo Ruins have been classified as an endangered species zone, as the ruined gallery of the Chozo Ruins is the only room that contains the rare subspecies of the native shriekbat that is brown instead of green. What does this all mean for the average explorer, then, you may ask? Simple. Keep a close eye out for them and either get the heck out of the way when they try to dive bomb you or blast them apart at a distance. Regardless, they shouldn't be too much of a serious risk if you have decent bodily protection and usually can get away with an assignment to threat level alpha. Taking a step back in time once again, the incinerator drone was a basic disposal unit crafted by the Chozo to process excess organic trash and other refuse by burning it to ashes. The device had been inactive for a while after the fall of the Chozo in Talon 4, but upon the hunter entering its vicinity, he detected that she was a foreign life form and immediately entered into offensive programming mode. The incinerator drone was never meant for actual combat, but the Chozo realized that it may require some if anyone were to ever try and use it to disable the heating and cooling equipment and the rest of the settlement, and thus gave enough intelligence to at least defend itself from harm. The machine uses twin flamethrowers to spray a blast of intense fire on opposite sides of its body, usually starting out with the flame held horizontally away from its body before eventually tipping them up and down to create streams of fire above and below its target, forcing them to be more careful with their maneuvering in its small containment chamber. While the machine was automated to run without the need for external data, every once in a while it would reveal its power core due to a malfunction in its main processor that occurred many years after the Chozo had already died out. Damaging this power core resulted in the machine tilting its streams vertically, accidentally burning the barbed wire wasp hive above it and making the creatures incredibly agitated as it continued to malfunction. The intense flames of the machine proved to be a viable hazard, but the hunter was able to eventually disable the machine by destroying its power core, and in its death throes, the machines burnt the above barbed wire wasp nest to bits before self-destructing. The fact that it was at least able to defend itself quite readily, despite its otherwise benign main purpose, certainly gives it a major advantage over some of the machines built by the Chozo on Talon 4, making it pretty easy to assign it to threat level beta, even if a little more than its host room is now left where it once operated. The stone toad is an abnormal amphibian that can easily prove to be the downfall of smaller creatures as a result of their patient lifestyles and otherwise voracious appetites. Stone toads are amphibious in nature, but do not resemble any form of earth amphibian as a result of the more insect-like internal structures, leaving their name assignment as one of appearance only. Regardless, these creatures possess large bulbous bodies with large tusks and bright green eyes that give them a very toad-like form. They sit patiently near bodies of water and in tight tunnels for days at a time, hoping that a small prey item will come along and stand in front of them. The moment that a stone toad spots something small enough to fit in its mouth, it will open it and inhale sharply, creating a vacuum strong enough to suck said object straight into the mouth where it is swallowed whole and quickly digested by the beast's potent stomach acids. If a stone toad accidentally swallows something that it cannot digest, it will spit the material back out after a short period, though the stomach acid will usually cause some minor damage to the object in the process. If forced to fight in close quarters, these monsters may resort to using their large tusks to pierce the flesh of other creatures, but most of the time they don't have to do anything, as the exoskeleton is as hard as stone and makes them impervious to most forms of weaponry. However, it has been observed that these creatures do not possess this type of protection on the inside, so if they can be goaded into swallowing some sort of small explosive, the concussive force of the blast can be enough to blow up the monsters from the inside out. Even so, stone toads are generally benign creatures and are best left alone, only to be destroyed if they block off access to an area and stubbornly refuse to move, and can even prove to be fun to play around with and get photo ops with, provided you don't let small children near them, giving them an assignment to threat level alpha. Reaper vines are an exotic plant form that generally feed on sunlight and water to receive their energy, but they're a bit different than most in that they live in very small crevices and are actually very weak, unable to sustain their own physical structure as a result of adapting to living in places where the plant forms cannot survive, namely in toxic water conditions. Even so, these creatures produce a number of restorative compounds in the body as a result of their natural biological processes and were hunted frequently for a time. In order to protect themselves, these creatures have developed a large scythe-like appendage that they use to ward off larger attackers that wish to feast on the juicy main body hidden in the cracks of stone walls. These beasts have developed an eye on their tentacle that can enable them to see targets as they approach and swing at them with their scythe tentacle, but their vision is actually quite poor, and they can only see a maximum distance of 10 meters away from them. As a result, it's usually pretty easy to sneak by them by staying out of the general viewing zone. If this is not a possibility though, then a shot from any weapon can produce a burst of light that can easily disrupt their vision and force them to retreat, and a charged shot from a heat-based weapon like the space-powered plasma beam can completely destroy them. Despite the fact that it may seem a bit easy to remove them from one's path, quick reflexes are still needed to avoid the swinging strikes they lash out with as soon as they have recovered, and tend to grow near high platforms to make it harder for potential prey to escape. So I can't really give these plants a threat level below that of beta, if only because of this and their incredible tenacity for survival. The puffer and all creatures that are related to it is a highly abnormal beast that pushes the definition of what can really be considered natural life. These gas-filled creatures are readily identified by their ball-shaped form and the numerous tubular structures that dot the surface of the thin skin that act as holes from which they can aggressively gather small prey in the air and expel the toxic gases that lie inside of them. While normal puffers tend to appear more underground locations on Talon 4, plated puffers are almost only found above ground and are the result of normal puffers being exposed to high levels of phazon radiation. Mutations caused by this exposure have allowed these creatures to incorporate pieces of metal from infrastructure in order to generate a thick layer of metal over their soft skin. As a result, these creatures have effectively become completely immune to all forms of basic weaponry, but their shell is still vulnerable to concussive blasts and therefore can be destroyed with a single missile, though this should be done at a distance as the gases they contain in their bodies are just as toxic as those possessed by normal puffers. Since they tend to only dwell in certain locations above ground in the Chozo ruins of Talon 4, their thick plated skin makes them a bit harder to handle compared to normal puffers, and their gas can be even more powerful in the right circumstances. So staying away from them is advised, and threat level beta is assigned to them, making avoiding them altogether the preferred method for dealing with them. Chozo ghosts are dangerous entities whose true physical construct and form is still an utter mystery, and will likely remain that way for the rest of time. These entities are believed to be the spirits of the Chozo that were poisoned and corrupted by the effects of phazon when Leviathan impacted Talon 4 50 years before the arrival of the Hunter on the planet. Though these creatures retained their Chozo bodies in life, their minds were twisted into returning to the mentality of a warrior race once more and bent to the will of phazon, and as a result, their extra-dimensional spirits remain trapped in the physical world, driven into violent madness by its effects. These entities proved to be a problem not only for the Hunter in her time on Talon 4, but also the space pirates, as both sides were unaware of what happened in the planet's past until it was too late to save the Chozo. These creatures will actively harass and attack those that visit Chozo shrines and temples in the Talon overworld, and especially the Chozo ruins, and show little in the way of remorse for even unintentional trespassing. Chozo ghosts face in and out of sight in the physical world constantly, making it almost impossible to track them. In fact, the only time they will show themselves in the physical world is when they are preparing an attack, though the bioelectric energy comprising their bodies can be tracked with X-ray visor technology. These entities will always choose to keep a distance from their targets, generating and using as a weapon orbs of energy of a composition that is indeterminable but highly damaging to energy shielding. These attacks can come as a series of projectiles thrown by hand or as a massive charged energy orb, and both of these shot types can deal considerable damage and disrupt visor technology for a short period of time after impact. Chozo ghosts are extremely quick-moving and can traverse large areas in seemingly no time, and their attack patterns are about as predictable as an insane ghost could be expected to be. Due to their ability to phase in and out of the physical world, these entities are completely immune to concussive weaponry, and any beam weapons utilize a natural element, like fire, ice, or electricity, to deal damage. The only thing that can damage the bioelectric field that comprises their body is regular light energy, making weapons like the standard power beam the only weapon that can reliably destroy them. Thankfully, it seems that most of these entities are no longer a problem or even present on Talon 4 anymore, as the destruction of Leviathan's guardian Metroid Prime has completely rid the planet of phazon corruption and in turn has allowed these tortured souls to finally move on. However, that doesn't mean that they are totally gone, and given the kind of power they can wield and the difficulty associated with destroying them, these entities definitely warrant an assignment to threat level Gamma, and should be dealt with carefully if they cannot be avoided, which can happen more times than not given that they tend to lock nearby doors until their presence vanishes completely. Lastly, let's take a look into the past one final time here at the monster that effectively poisoned the Chozo ruins on Talon 4 and made the land uninhabitable for much of the native Chozo, the now terminative floral nightmare known as Flagra. Prior to its mutation into a monster, the Flagra was part of a giant sacred flower similar in form to the blood flower but with any of its volatile powers. It was often the site of many rituals and celebrations among the Chozo of Talon 4 and was valued for its enormous size and the purifying effects its roots had on the waters of the area, allowing clean water to flow through every single open source in the Chozo ruins. However, the corruption of Phazon brought forth by Leviathan mutated the parasite that had been growing in the flower and caused it to infect the entire plant to transform it into a giant serpentine monster. While it may have once purified the waters of the Chozo ruins, its roots now sunk deep into the ground within the reach of Phazon, deep below the surface, and began to expel toxins through its roots. Its mutated hydration system polluting the waters of the Chozo ruins so much that it killed most of the plant life and mutated what was left, rendering it so corrosive that even the energy shields from armor suits were not enough to stave off its effects. The mutated Flogra made the Chozo ruins uninhabitable, and that was just the smallest change that this creature brought forth. The organism had also developed sentience and a complex nervous system in its root base that allowed it to actively target and attack anything that got in its way, and with its powerful toxins, there was no Chozo capable of defeating it in battle, forcing them to abandon their former home. Flogra's large serpentine body had developed an extremely thick layer of skin that made it impervious to direct damage from any form of weaponry, though it could still be stunned with enough firepower. In close quarters, the monster relied mainly on its lone pair of appendages to attack, which were little more than massive size capable of cutting through flesh and bone with ease and rendering the energy shields of armor suits effectively null. The monster's real power, however, came from its ability to use toxins to damage its target, most often by spewing small orbs or even a large orb of concentrated poison at its foes with enough power to damage even armored fighters. Moreover, it could open its nasty mouth and release a mutant strain of toxic mushrooms and plant forms that could cover part of the sun chamber it lived in, blocking off access to parts of the room until the toxic creatures withered away into dust. Flogra's attack patterns were slightly unpredictable, and just trying to get close to it was a bad idea, as the water around its base was simply too toxic to enter. Plus, its roots blocked off the entrance tunnels that were once used to transfer water from it into the pools outside the sun chamber. However, all of this increased power had rendered the monster vulnerable to damage in a unique way. Because of the parasite plant's hybrid's accelerated growth, it required massive concentrations of sunlight in order to function, using forward-focusing discs scattered across the edges of its resting chamber to supply it with the concentrated energy it needed to survive. If all the active discs were knocked out into a closed position, by targeting the red swing node at the bottom end of the dish, Flogra would be unable to support itself and would fall to the ground, its roots retreating out of the channels they had been blocking. Using morph ball bombs, the hunter was able to take advantage of this to drop said bombs into bomb slots at the end of the tunnels, hurting Flogra's central nervous system in the process and destroying some of the small projections on the monster's body with each successful attack. She had to do this an additional 3 times, with the monster requiring increasing amounts of energy to stay aloft each time, and even knocking discs back up to keep its power going, but it was eventually killed as the central nervous system was incinerated, destroying the parasite and ridding the central flower and the water of the Chozo ruins free of its corruption. With all of this said, it is more than obvious that this entity was a genuine scourge to the lands it sought to drain life out of, and for its incredible resilience and the sheer damage it did to its environment, it deserves its assignment to threat level Delta, and it is a better thing for all life in general that it has been eradicated completely. The Chozo ruins of Talon 4 may be perhaps the most arid location on the planet that is still at least inhabitable for a lot of life, and in turn shows a wide variety of biota than any other location in the natural lands of the planet. But that doesn't mean that it can also be the easiest to explore in any instance. On the one hand, the ruins were much harder and more dangerous to navigate prior to the destruction of Flogra because of the toxins that had leaked into the waters of the area, so comparing then to now, it is possible for the waterways built by the Chozo for irrigation to actually be explored and traveled through with no real threat of extreme danger. And the climate of the area is rather stable, if dry, thus making it easy to enjoy outside and even some of its darker depths. However, the fact that land is home to so many different types of life form also means that it can be difficult to plan for if one is exploring it for the very first time. As such, while the land can be a good place for visitors to set up camp and explore, a little bit of caution and attention should be paid to the natives, as the creatures here can be small and hard to see, and thus all the more a hazard for one to deal with if one is not prepared to handle them. That wraps up this info video on the Chozo ruins of Talon 4, and I hope this will all prove to be useful for those that are looking to take a visit there sometime in the future. We're still just warming up though, so get your thermal gear ready for some serious use, as next time we'll be diving straight into the heart of the planet as we take a trip to explore the depths of Magmoor Caverns. Thank you for reaching the end of this presentation. While we might not always get along, the Space Pirates and myself, in whatever capacity we can manage, are dedicated to analyzing and examining the life forms of many different worlds, extant and extinct, to show the great variety of life that exists out within the greater cosmos. If you enjoyed this info video and would like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more information. We'll do our best to keep pumping out data so the greater public has an understanding of what to expect when exploring alien planets and their denizens. With that, have a safe journey, and have your bribes prepared beforehand if you happen to come near our territory.